Hello everyone and welcome back to Tarot and Torch. I hope all of you have had a wonderful month of May. Today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the decks that I used in May and kind of where my practice was and some of the major themes that have been just coming up for me during that time. So May was it was definitely a very busy month. As I had mentioned, I had celebrated Mother's Day and then my birthday and my daughter's birthday and had her party, and we also went to a concert. So there was just a lot that was going on. It was all good things, very fun, exciting things, but of course that left very little, I shouldn't say very little, much less time for the deeper reflections that I wanted to have. But life does have that way of kind of revealing, the things that need to be examined anyhow. So there was kind of that deeper time or those deeper explorations still happening, kind of in the way that I was experiencing the busyness and all that that occurred in May. This May, I have to say, was very different than a lot of other Mays in past years, and I feel that that is very astrological because of the way that Uranus kind of had a part to play in all of that. But in any case, it did feel very different. It was very busy and much less earthy and wild, which is how I actually prefer my May. But in that, it was very interesting because I found myself connecting much more to the kind of the Empress archetype than I have in a really long time. I would say maybe even since before I had my babies. So, and they're not babies anymore, but they're always my babies. So it's, that's been 11 years, and I just was reflecting very deeply on how I've changed over that amount of time, and there's just so many layers that really transformed in those years. And of course that was also while Uranus was in my sign. So it really did change my identity, and also Uranus moving out of my sign seems to have also changed my identity further. So and not completely, of course, just in subtle ways. The first time when Uranus changed into Taurus, I completely changed my life. I was actually teaching at a high school, and I was teaching English. I became pregnant with my daughter, and during that time, I tried to stay, teaching, but something kept pulling me towards, psychic work and spiritual work. And so my life shifted into that realm much more than it had in terms of actual work. Prior to, I had been in that world anyhow because I taught myself how to read tarot when I was about 11 years old, and that's when I had my my first deck, and I purchased a book, and I was very ingrained into myth and spirituality, reading about all the different religions in the world, and just always in that realm. But something really deeply called to me when Uranus shifted that first time, and it showed me a different path that my life needed to take. And that's what Uranus does. So it shifting kind of into Gemini now is very interesting. And, it's that's actually where my Mars is. So there's some interesting things that I feel I will still be shifting into, but what I have felt during May is kind of this deeper attention to the way that I'm presenting myself and how I feel most free in that self-expression, which has, been something that I've experienced over that Uranus transit. But now it's shifting into more of almost an elevated version of what I was before. So that's not something that's always been important to me, actually. I was always someone that wore like jeans and t-shirts and, not really someone that dressed up to the nines or anything. And I'm still not, I'm very far from that. I'm very casual and my life demands it. But in subtle ways, there's been a shift in kind of the way I present myself, in the way I do my makeup, in the way that I style my clothing and jewelry, just, those little things. So anyhow, I'm going to talk now about the decks. Most of them I covered in the last video, but some also just came out to play, after the fact, as they do. But these are like the main kind of decks that I worked with, and also just how those are working for me. So Shadow of Darkness, the Shadow of Darkness Oracle by Syrian Shadow. This was very fitting for this month because, again, I was exploring some deep kind of themes around all of the topics that I mentioned, also around boundaries, which is still kind of in play. But this was a great deck for that. And the way that I use my new decks is I take a card just about, daily and reflect on it, journal around it, think on it, really just kind of steep in it. And I found that this deck is very accurate to what I'm experiencing. And I can't say that that's always the case, because there's some decks that don't quite have that ability, in my opinion. Some decks are better suited to other ways of reading. But this one gives you at least it gives me very specific kind of information that I need right now. And that also just could be where I am right now, that I'm in need of that kind of information. However, it was very helpful in kind of getting me to that place of understanding, to get out of my own way, really. So it was very good for that. And I really enjoy this deck for, the interesting depictions. Sometimes as, tarot collectors, readers, things can get a little samey, if we have a particular style that we like, or, decks that we use all the time. So this was really nice to break me out of that, because it's very different imagery. And also, it was just fitting for me because, again, this month had a lot to do with self-expression, boundaries, and then there's also music played a huge part in this month, as the music that I listen to also helps with these themes. We went to a Black Veil Brides concert on the 29th, and I loved it so much. It was our second time seeing them, but the music I've been listening to for years, and there's something so absolutely healing for me in their music, because they do discuss a lot of themes around kind of spiritual trauma, and that is honestly probably what led me to them in the first place. Because when you have spiritual trauma, you tend to become drawn to others that also have had that, experience, or it just kind of comes together in that way. But beyond that, their lyrics speak to authenticity and, not caring about others' interpretation of you, and also knowing that you can succeed despite, the noise. So all of these themes are very important to me, and I found them in this deck as well. So it was almost a little bit of a what's the word? So it was just a beautiful pairing in that way. And, it's very intense. It brings up, this deck does bring up a lot of feelings. But I found it still to be very positive. I don't know what it is, or how rather Syrian does it, but his decks can really hit you in the face, but at the same time make you feel loved and supported. Somehow his decks can make you feel loved and supported at the same time. So this deck is just that for me. And it also has just a rebellious spirit in the healing that is done. So it's like a spiritual rebel, I should say. So it went very well with kind of the things that I was listening to, thinking about, journaling around, and it's a very new friend in my collection that is very special to me, because again it does encompass a lot of healing and deep support in places that I'm still moving through and understanding about myself. So really loved it. And the imagery, like I said, is just nice to break up kind of some of the monotony, while still being in that realm that I feel very comforted in at the same time. So that is the Shadow of Darkness Oracle. Next, I did use the Haunted Cottage Oracle, and this is a deck that I received in May for as a birthday deck. So you may have seen the unboxing for this, but this, I really consider this my top pick of May, the favorite of May, for so many reasons. It's incredibly gorgeous, and while I do not only look at the aesthetics for readings, they are important because that really can flavor the type of messages that you are receiving. So this deck is one that you can get very lost into in the best possible way. It's also it's another very emotional deck, and for me it's especially emotional. I feel my grandmother's presence in this deck. My grandmother raised me and was basically my mom because of that, and her loss was very difficult, and I actually had a dream about her not long ago as well. So this deck really, I feel her presence when I use the deck, and I'm trying not to get emotional right now as I'm talking about it, because I want to be clear in what I'm saying, but it does evoke that for me. And as such, it's a great way to work with ancestors and those that have passed on, as well as, ancestral spirits. and even genus loci. But there is a very deep spiritual energy to this deck that I felt it a little as I was doing the unboxing, but as I used it, it just continued to deepen and deepen. So it's very, in that way, it's very comforting and healing, because it feels like when I use this deck, you know, my grandmother's voice is there, as well as her presence. And there is something very comforting, but there's also this guidance that feels very spiritually divined in a way that is not expected, because it's such a quiet deck, as in the imagery is very quiet and serene, but the messages and the energy coming from it can be very powerful. So and for some reason when I work with this deck, I do not always get the kind of working with solitude energy, and that could also very well be because I work with solitude pretty much my entire life. I work from home, and I do not have a big circle of people that I engage with. So solitude for me is already, it's something I'm very well familiar with and work through, and am not bothered by, to be quite frank. But I feel more just again like a past connection to people and sometimes places. And there is a nature energy in a lot of these as well. That's very beautiful. But I love the emotions that are evoked here, the artwork, and it is one that you can definitely use for path working, for dream work, for you know, some psychic work even. This could probably be used for, again, connecting to spirits, but also maybe even finding lost objects in nature. But there's a lot of psychic energy in this deck, for sure. And I really, I feel so emotionally connected to this deck in a way that beyond even how I'm describing it right now. So, I mean, this deck brings me to tears, and I'm feel my eyes welling up right now, but in the best way. So, now I have been using this deck with, and this is going to seem strange, but one of the pairings that I have used this with is the, let's see how I'm going to show you here. The Tarot of Vampires. And you can see that the colors are sometimes similar in some of the cards, not all of them, but there are, let's see, you can see it a little bit more in this one, where there's this mistiness, this green kind of blue cast. And those cards especially work really well with the imagery in this deck, in this oracle, I should say. And of course, you know, for me, this deck is very, it'll go with anything, the Tarot of Vampires, because I use it so very frequently, and it's just, you know, a permanent, I reach for it very often. But it works very well with this deck, I have found, in my opinion, and it may seem a little strange, but you know, like this deck or this card here. The voices are, of course, very different, but the meanings are on point still when you work with these together. So I liked this as one pairing. Another pairing, and this is another deck that I have been using this month, is the Ode to Artemis Tarot of the Huntress deck. And you can see how the cards, you know, play together. So this was a really nice pairing as well. And it also helped me to use this deck because I love the Tarot of the Huntress, and it has the nature themes, and the colors work pretty well together. I mean, they're not going to be the same, which is fine. I'm not always looking at it through only an aesthetic lens, but it really does help to emphasize the spiritual aspect that the oracle contains. So this was just another beautiful match. And it really does help it to feel ancient and, you know, like another time as well, which is something that I mentioned that the Haunted Cottage Oracle creates this kind of past energy, timelessness. It's very interesting, very interesting. And then another pairing for the Haunted Cottage Oracle that I want to work with, and I will do so in this month, is the Witch Sister, but I'll talk about that in that video. Oh, there was one other one that I did work with actually with this deck, and that is the Lacrimosa. So the Lacrimosa is also very still and quiet, and that really, the stillness and the quietness of the Lacrimosa goes exceptionally well, even though the aesthetic and some of the colors are a little different. It really helps to bring out that more of that solitude aspect, if that's what you are wanting to focus on, in almost kind of a church-like way, because the Lacrimosa has that kind of feeling of like mass. So this grounds that a little bit, but also brings in that stillness and quietness, which I really liked. When you're feeling a bit overstimulated, that's another great way to use this deck, the Haunted Cottage Oracle. It was definitely the case for me, as I had so much going on socially, that I'm not... It was very much all at once, even though, again, it was all very positive. It can be a bit much for me, so it was just nice to kind of come home and connect to something that wasn't as demanding for my energy. So empaths, you'll understand what I'm saying. So yeah, that was another beautiful pairing that I enjoyed. But you know, this is very subjective, and anything can really work with anything as long as your heart is looking for that meaning, and the decks are ones that speak to you personally. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know how was your May? Did you also experience a lot of kind of chaos, or just a lot going on? Did you feel hurried as well? And what decks were your favorites of the month to use? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here, and I will talk to all of you very, very soon.